Hi everyone, it's just gone 7, so I think we're going to get going with this reading. My name's Jasmine, I'm from Carcanet Press. Thank you all for being here. Obviously we're here to launch Sumita Chakraborty's debut collection, Arrow. It's really exciting. She's joining us from the States, so it's a real pleasure that we can do this in this year of all years, that we can have a live reading from Sumita. So thank you all so much for being here. Now, Sumita's going to be joined by Jane Yeh. Jane is also a Carcanet poet. Her third collection came out with us last year, Discipline. It was a Poetry Book Society recommendation, so if you don't know her work, it is available on the website, so do check it out. She'll be talking to Sumita a little later on about the new book. So before I hand over to Jane to introduce Sumita, I just want to run over a few things with you. Obviously we can't see you because this is a webinar, but we're really grateful that you're here, and we would really like to hear from you. I can see that someone's already found the chat box. Please do find that, say hello to us, let us know how you're enjoying the reading. Just say hi, it's really good to hear from you guys in there. What's going to happen tonight is this event's going to last for about 1 hour. In a second, I'll disappear. I'm going to hand over to Jane, who's going to give us a proper introduction to Sumita and to the new book. And then Sumita will appear herself and give us a reading from the book. While she's reading, I'm going to be sharing the text on screen so that you can read along. The thing that you need to know is that you're in control of your own screen. So Sumita's face might get really small. You can make that bigger, just drag the corners of the box. If you don't want to see the text at all, you can double click on her face. But if you struggle, put a message in the chat and I can help you there as well. So after Sumita's reading, Jane will return. They'll have a little bit of discussion at that point. And then we'd really like to open it out to audience questions. So if you find somewhere on your screen, there'll be an option for Q&A. You might have to click on the More button, a little ... Please find the Q&A box and get some questions in there that Jane can ask Sumita later, because we want to get you involved in this conversation and we want you to be a part of the launch as well. So that's for later on. The last thing for me to tell you is, well, is to thank you for paying your £2 to be here. We appreciate that. You will get £2 off the book. I'll put that in the chat later for you, so you can copy it then, or you can just check your emails tomorrow and have a look for it then. So I think that's everything from me. Without further ado, I am going to hand over to Jane so that we can get going.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. And obviously, I'm very excited to be hosting this launch and celebrating Sumita's amazing debut. So I guess I'll just have a brief intro and read you her bio as well before she starts. Reading Arrow, Sumita Chakraborty's stunning debut collection, is an experience both dazzling and overwhelming. These are poems that dazzle with the rigor of their imagination, plunging the reader into an internal universe of occluded allegories and recurring figures: birds, orchids, barbed wire, horses, the moon. As the American poet Diane Seuss puts it, one feels in the presence of an oracular intelligence and an abiding lyric imagination. The voice in these poems is strikingly intense, even as the lines leap from subject to subject and the voice splits into others, multiplying its arguments, as in a hall of mirrors. The poems are fond of paradox, or the way that opposites can exist simultaneously. For instance, in the sequence titled Arrow, Chakraborty writes, "You need to know that the moment I say something's persistent, as I have here with gravity, I immediately imagine it vanished." And a few pages later, "Some of my favorite words mean wildly contrary things." The refractive, dare I say, dreamlike nature of the poems in Arrow is matched by its formal variety and restless generosity. I'll just finish up with some praise for Arrow from another American poet, Ilya Kaminsky, which sums up my feelings as well. "All one can do is repeat. This is an endlessly compelling book. Bravo." Sumita's bio reads, Sumita Chakraborty is a poet, essayist, and scholar. She is Helen Zell Visiting Professor in Poetry at the University of Michigan, where she teaches literary studies and creative writing. In 2017, she received a Ruth Lilly and Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Fellowship from the Poetry Foundation. And in 2018, her poem, And Death Demands a Labor, was shortlisted for the Forward Prize for Best Single Poem. Formerly, she was poetry editor of Agni magazine and art editor of At Length. Welcome, Sumita.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? If you can't, now would be a great time to tell me in the chat so I'm not just reading to myself for the next however many minutes. Okay, I'll take that as a good sign. Thanks, Amy. Thank you all so very much for coming. Thank you, Jane, for that introduction. That was very, very kind. I usually get incredibly bashful during introductions, so I'm grateful that this time I had the opportunity to hide behind my profile picture and blush in private. Thank you to Jazz, to Becky, to Michael, to the entire Carcanet crew for this. Michael reached out to me and asked if I had a manuscript before I had a manuscript or even an American publisher. So honestly, this means the absolute world to me. I wish I could be there in person to see all of you on your side of the pond, but I'm very, very grateful that we found a way to spend time together this evening, and I'm grateful to you for being here. I want to start out with the poem that isn't in the book. It's called And Death Demands a Labor. I think of this poem as kind of a prequel to Arrow. Arrow is really about living in the aftermath of a number of different kinds of violence, and most closely to me, autobiographically for the book, that's domestic violence. This poem itself didn't quite fit into the story I wanted to tell in the book, in part because the book is about the aftermath of violence, and this poem is more directly about living in the violence. But I want to start with it today because it gives a bit of a preview to what the speaker is thinking about in the course of the book Arrow. And death demands a labor. When it rains in Boston, from each street rises the smell of sea. So do the faces of the dead. For my father, I will someday write, on this day endeth this man, who did all he could to craft the most intricate fears, this man whose waking dreams were breaking the small bones in the feet of all the world's birds. Father, you know the stories. You were raised on them. To end a world, a god dances. To kill a demon, a goddess turns into one. Almanacs of annihilation are chronicled in cosmic time. Go on. Batter everything of mine that you can find. Find my roe deer with a single antler, kill him. Find a girl or a woman. Display to me her remains on some unpaved expanse, like roadkill on Kentucky highways, turning from flesh to a fine sand made of ground bone, under a sun whose surface reaches temperatures 6 times hotter than the finest crematory. On the surface of the earth, our remains are an unholy concert with the remains of all who have gone before and all who will follow, and with all who live. In this way, our ground resembles a bone house. Search in my body for my heart. Find it doesn't sit gently where you learned it to be. Thieve in my armory. Take my saws, take my torches, and drown my phalanx of bees. Carve into me the words of the chronicler of hell. Make your very best catastrophe. My piano plays loud and fast, although my hands are nowhere to be found. Father, as you well know, I am but a woman. I believe in neither gods nor goddesses. I have left my voice up and down the seam of this country. I, unlike you, need no saws or torches. The bees you drowned will come to me again. Each time you bear a weapon, I, no more than a woman, grow a new limb. Each time you use a weapon, my sinews grow like vines that devour a maple tree. When I cry, my face becomes the inescapable sea, and when you drain blood from a creature, I drink it. On this day, this man died, having always eaten the good food amid the angry ghosts, having always made the most overwrought hells. On this day, the moon waxes gibbous and the moths breed in the old carpets. On this day, from a slit in the ground rises a girl who does not live long. On this day, to me, a lover turns his back and will not meet my eye. On this day, the faces of the death marked are part willow, part lion. On this day has has died, an artist of ugly tapestries, and his wares burst into flame. On this day endeth this man, upon who I hurl the harvest of this ghostly piano, and on the surface of this exceptional world, the birds have all come to our thresholds, our windows and our doors, our floorboards, our attic crannies and underground storerooms, wires and railroads, tarmacs, highways, cliffs and oceans, and have all begun to laugh, a sound like an orange and glittering fire that originates from places unseen. So that's the prequel to the event. I'm so excited to be able to hold this. I was so thrilled when they arrived. Also, a round of applause for the Carcanet team. It is gorgeous. Through the course of Arrow, my speaker, I think, develops in a few key ways. The book starts finding my speaker, who, yes, is pretty much me, in a position where, for the first time, she is feeling like she has the right and the need to take up space and to have her grief and her pain honored in some large way. And as a result, there are many early poems in the book that are really defiant and really angry and really absorbed in her own pain and trying to analogize it and map that onto a larger, more universal world. As the book progresses, I think that one of the journeys that the speaker goes on is not coincidentally the same journey that I went on, which is trying to remember to be able to honor that kind of individual grief and pain and remember that, you know, one can take up space with those things while also acknowledging that on varying scales, other people and other histories, other stories have also involved massive amounts of pain. So I think you see a shift from the early poems in the book where the speaker is quite angry and often trying to claim universal rights in some ways that make me a little uncomfortable in retrospect to the concepts of suffering. And then toward the end of the book, the middle and the end, starts really being able to check herself on that impulse, I hope. So I'm going to start with the very first poem in the book, which certainly does come from that massive angry place, and it's called Marigolds. This is a long one, and I don't think you need to know terribly much in advance, except that there are a number of literary references here, references to poets whom I call by their first names, as you'll see right there, starting off with apparently my friend, Robert Lowell. There are also lines from Titus Andronicus that are woven into the poem. And I think that's pretty much all you need to know before we get going. When I picture Robert, he's in the public garden watching setting suns like the ill-fated king turn all to gold. Robert with the swans, Robert under the statue of Washington, Robert amid the tulips. Without a childhood home, I made for myself a house of orchids, of sewer grates with fishes on them, of forsythia and maple trees. Of this I am sure. When Robert crossed the bridge between Boston and Cambridge, he saw Poseidon. In late summer, he could tell that underneath the sailboats is a god, mighty and to be feared. In midwinter, he alone knew the ice could not long contain that god. In the pipes in his home, he heard the gurgle of illness. I smell illness in the riotous orchid blooms. What are midnight trees? I think that once I knew one such tree, if it is the kind owls gather on nightly to fight, barking, eyes dim with bloodlust and the hiss of feathers. I built for myself a house of orchids with a cave underneath, a cave shaped into an armory brimming with tarantula hawks, giant sparrow bees, and admiral butterflies. In place of stalactites hang treeless, inextricable roots. Oh, sacred receptacle of my joys. The day I first learned the word Argonaut, I wrote it in a poem. I searched the seas for one. I searched the skies. I searched a painting. In the painting, I found the word spears, which I drove slowly into my father's ribs. He I eulogized, and he I resurrected, reaching again for the spears. I have seen countless full moons fail. Each of them hollowed, flooding heart first, the craw-faced light, the bracken underneath. Then the sound of a wounded owl, a soft, sudden darkness in my throat. Oh, how this villainy. In morning, the owls are replaced by hawks. From one angle, broad-winged hawks seem to have two pairs of hollow eyes. We are looking for you, say the kettles of satellites to the humans lost, to the plane disappeared, to what lives 30 miles below the surface of Enceladus. On this morning in April, Hikeson 01, Ocean Shield, and HMS Echo hear a thump that sounds like the colors inside an oyster shell. The frequency of the noise can make a heart stop. Anxious as seaweed, over the sides of the ships creep hordes of trembling locators. The satellites stare with breath hitching in their throats. Between the wine-colored hull of Ocean Shield and Enceladus lies 8 times the distance between Earth and Sun. 30 miles below the surface of that geyser-ridden, tiger-striped Saturnian moon lies life, report the satellites. The hawks steal their 2 pairs of eyes up toward alien oceans on other planets. What I am is all that I can carry, wrote Deborah. What can I carry? All that I caught, I left behind. All that I missed, I carried. The hawks are not looking toward alien oceans. I am. I am looking too to alien men and women. I picture hurtling into them by turn to serve my lust. I picture us bent sideways, impaled, contorted, and screaming. I picture the different shades of a moan. The word bed fills the 4 eyes in my mind with the color gold. Gold of the ill-fated king and the garden sunset. Gold glinting in a decaying tooth. Goldenrod, a haze of pollen. The dragon's treasure, a long necklace of many fine gold chains reaching down to a woman's hips. Young woman walks down to the river of gold. Young woman walks down to the river and drowns. In the word bed also joyously wail, bed, the color of ashen near death. Bed, the fleshly color of bodies broken for good. Bed, the color blue of heart-stopped lips. Oh, here I lift this one hand up to heaven. The ghosts of the poisoned dogs live in the piano. The ghost of my mother, still living, lives in her excised tumor and staghorn kidney stone. The ghost of my ability to love without grief, still living, lives in this poem. All my pockets filled with stones, in the river I'll be found. Why then, I am the devil's dam. Dangle me from a cliff, 12,000 feet above sea. Oh, speak with possibilities. Build me a skin of glass to cover the Grand Canyon, throw me on it, summon 1,000 wilding mares, restrain them with massive chains, foot-long links of hardened steel. When the chains buck from fracture, let the mares stampede the glass, bid them trample my body, watch from a great distance as the glass cracks, watch us beasts entangle, watch me take a hoof to the mouth, to the skull, to the groin, hear us squeal and bark and howl, calling out as wretches do to failing life. When at last we 1,001 blood-filled creatures reach the bottom of the canyon, throw yourself in. My voice in your ear will tell you that you were meant to die like this, a beautiful and inelegant dive onto a field of reds, some bright and sun-kissed, some dark and pulp-dashed, your and our blood across the burnt orange schist. See, oh, see what I have done. I fear neither the sight of nor the word for blood. HMAS Albatross has joined the search for the plane. It is May now and there is no sign of it. The detritus lied. The home I made is of orchids, forsythia, barbed wire, and burnt metal. In the bedroom, I planted what I imagine a midnight tree to be. Its roots join the treeless roots in the armory beneath. Ravished, my hands cut off, my tongue cut out. I put my home under the wisteria, craving owls at war under thick purple overhang. No territory there is that is not mine. The albatross, it is mine. Enceladus is mine. Your innermost spy beneath the wisteria, mine. Poseidon is mine. And the river between Boston and Cambridge and the one that wends through Georgia floods into the Gulf. I am dreaming of a monument to moments colonized by theaters of the imagination. Oh, monstrous. The O of a mouth without a tongue. The O of 2 pairs of lips clasped, starving on one another, horns and cry of hounds. The ballet in my deadly standing eye as the arrows flight into the neck, the horses tumble into the canyon, a nation's search for a single tiger with quills in its neck, a spilled cloud of felled bees, the elephant's horror in the flock of red-billed birds, feathered locusts who from their first breath form trembling caverns with their mouths, their aggregate force snapping branches off trees. The orchestra plays low drum beats, a single singer carving the melody. Do not, I pray, promise me an untroubled lake. Take me instead to the rivers with vengeful gods under steaming and frozen waters. Take me instead for the stag, the rifle, and the hunter. Promise me unending days in which I can picture, then picture again, a fire whirl, the slowness of the sea drinking a ferry or a plane, the gasps of air bubbles around carapaces, the moons of Saturn. I myself am hell's, and I prize them as if they were the rarest blooms. Promise me I will always reach again for spheres, await the horses on the glass, above the gaping hollow O of the earth. All is lost. Flee this house. So chanced James's Ouija. Or perhaps in the palace of time, our lives are a circular stare, and I am turning, writes Lucille's ghost-guided hand. Always in my mouth I hold the head of an axe with its bit at the back of my throat. Oh heavens, can you hear a man groan? Here nothing breathes but we phased and hungry. Oh wondrous thing. Worlds such as this were not thought possible to exist, writes the astronomer. It is June. Deep beneath those golden waves of the river I'll be found. My sister has joined the list of those I mourn. Her ghost lives in each powder-winged moth. In the ballet, the stage fills with a troupe of dancers in dusty gold skirts, shoes asphyxiation blue, hair the tones of flesh. Center stage are 6 dancers who wear only red, moving in unison so they throb as one bloodied yoke. The troupe around them shudders as though in blissful death throes. The single singer quiets, the orchestra breaks down its instruments. For my brethren slain, I ask a sacrifice, O barbarous, beastly villains like myself. Die. Die saying please, die longing, die helpless, die with your eyes fixed to the most treacherous side of a mountain, to newborn stars, to plains not found. Die with your throat stuffed so that each moment hereafter is a dream of a gasp. Die so that my midnight tree might grow new branches. Die like a sapling struck by lightning in an ash-ridden and still smoldering field. Die amid the tulips. Die smelling the orchids I grow. Die in the mass of horses, in a pied flock of shrieking birds. From the oceans, creatures great and small take to the land. From the land, each parachuted seed takes to the sky. From within my armory comes a scent melodious and unearthly. A strain of moths, black, flies as though sewn each to each at the wing. Their flight path blooms dark into the gray air like a print from a silvered glass plate. Soon we will learn our bodies are formed of dead stars, so that if we made incisions from breastbone to rectum, the caves within would reveal themselves to house celestial ash. As the stag, I fear the mouth of the rifle. As the rifle, I point my mouth deadly toward you. As the hunter, I execute myself so I may feast. Worlds such as this were not thought possible to exist. My lord, I aim a mile beyond the honeyed moon. I promise I won't put you through anything else that's that long. Throughout the book, there are several poems titled "O Spirit," and they're moments where I think what I'm doing is kind of taking the temperature of where my speaker is at developmentally, psychologically, and accordingly, the ones toward the beginning of the book are precisely as brutal as the voice toward the beginning of the book are. I'm going to read a few of those, or just 2 of those, I think, over the course of this, and the first one is coming up right now. It's a 2-line poem. To help myself rise in the morning, I make a promise. Someday, I will cause as much pain as I feel. I'd love to invite Jane back for the next one. There are a few dialogue poems in this book. I've gone and forgotten my own page number of the first one. There it is. This is a poem called Night Questions, and Jane has kindly agreed to read the italicized line, which means that Jane is night.
Should I just start?
Yeah, feel free.
Okay. When does the moon turn full?
When I tell it stories of love.
When does the moon begin to wane?
when I stop speaking of love.
What do you look like in the dark?
A horned, lit, and petrified tree on a shore.
To whom do you turn when in pain?
Thanks, Jane.
Welcome.
I've never gotten to do that one before because it always makes me feel kind of corny to be doing both parts. So this is actually a real treat. This is another O Spirit poem from around the middle of the book. So I'm guessing you'll hear a bit of a change in tone. A bear brings forth her young, informous and unshapen. I now wear the pelt of the conjured beast around my groin. I think of new words for solace, one of which is knifed. We take no form until licked into shape by the tongues of those who love us. Just two more. Throughout the book, in various moments of acute distress, my speaker calls out to Nyx. So this is actually Night coming back. Nyx is the Greek titan of night. And my speaker will usually call on her and have a conversation with her at various points when she's feeling particularly in grief or particularly confused. Toward the end of the book, in part due to exactly that problem of scale and being able to honor one's own pain without necessarily needing to make it everything in the universe, I have a persona poem in the voice of Nyx. I imagine her rather frustrated with me for having addressed her so frequently for the problems of one mere mortal, because although the problems of one mere mortal are deservedly huge to that mortal and other people, I think of, what Nyx has to control is all of night, is all of the universe, right? So it probably really does not matter whatever my small problems are, even if they're large to me. And that is essentially what I imagine Nyx telling me when she scolds me, which is what I'm going to do right now. I have a lot of fun reading this one. I really like scolding myself. Arrow, it's one of two title poems in the book. Was it I who invaded the day or the day who invaded me? I do, I undo, I redo. I enlarged the figure till it was a mountain. I don't fear the sublime. And I cut off its head, having already cut out its tongue. I have 3 siblings and flocks of children, and though we're oft confused, you must know that I differ from all. I am not my brother darkness, nor my sister dirt, nor my brother torment. I am a time, and I am an astronomy, a geometry I invented myself, an architecture, a divine. And like any divine, yes, I have made kin from unions with my kin. Out of a union with my brother, I made the nymphs, the river, and the boatsmen lullabies. If X is an abstraction, and if the poetry of X was music, then this poem is a musical abstraction. And if this poem is a musical abstraction, then this poem is a lullaby, my kin born of my kin. I am a space as much as I am a voice. Did you truly hail me for a dim-witted conversation about love? Me? There is nothing like me. I am no more like my siblings or my parents than I am like a placid lake or the gaping from which I was born. I am a charioteer, a bird. Would you believe me if I said I also made the ether and the day? Whether or not your faith is stored in my ear, I am sure in what I have made. How could I be both gentle enough and dangerous enough for your thoughts? Do you have thoughts? I asked about moon, dark, pain. You only gave me yourself. And as to my other question, it was me. I invaded the day. It didn't stand a chance. The last poem I'll read is the last poem in the book, and it's called O. Stars are not the end, but the beginning. A bird is to its throat, as a promise is to its sharp edge. I wanted to make for you a sun shower. Instead, I have made for you a mortal thing. Writing is knowing how to cut. There is a space in my body that did not exist when I began this book. It is a window. When I next speak, I will do so through that window. Please leave the window unlatched. When I next speak, it will be with changed lips. I wonder what their color will be. Finally, she enlarges the figure to a grand scale and cuts off its head. Thank you all so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Sumita. That was really amazing, and really cool to hear the poems out loud after reading them on the page only, obviously. And I don't know if you can see the chat that's been going on in between the poems, but everyone is raving about how incredible it was, obviously.
I see that all so much.
So at this point, I guess if people have questions they want to ask, they can type them into the kind of Q&A box, or they can do them in the chat sidebar if they can't find the Q&A box. But I guess for now, I'll just start off with a couple of questions. So I was really interested in the way that Marigolds, which you read, and a couple of the other poems in the book are pretty long and extended, which, like, to me, I guess just somehow, like, I always write really, really short poems, so I can't even get my head around how, you know, you make such a thing that's so complex and interesting and sort of like interlayered with itself. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about like what your process of writing Marigolds was like, and just how it came to come together like that.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Marigolds was actually the first long poem I ever successfully wrote, and I did not set out trying to write one. I was writing a piece of academic scholarship on Robert Lowell at the time, actually, and I found myself unable to do what I had to do critically because there was just a little private lyric communication that I had going on with him in my mind. So what I thought I was going to do was just write one sonnet. It was going to be a bad sonnet addressed to Robert Lowell, clear the pipes, get on with it, do the rest of my work, put the thing in a drawer, never look at it again. Then it kept going, and it turned out to not be about Robert Lowell really at all. So it kind of just ran away with me. And I think that what helped me write it was, instead of thinking, oh, I'm going to set out to write a long poem, I thought I would just write until the story of that poem was done. And then wherever it ended was wherever it ended. And I think that helped a lot because that's exactly what I did. And then, you know, for interlayering in all the detail, which, thank you, that's very kind of you to say. What I often do when I'm writing a long poem is I print out the draft at several stages and I look back through it and see if I've dropped any balls, if the balls that I've dropped were meant to be dropped, or if I had meant to pick them back up, and then kind of take a tapestry type approach to the whole thing from the beginning to the end until I feel like it's kind of airtight to me. So yeah, at first I fell into it by accident, and then layering in all the details, some of that really was just the slow accumulation of time.
Thanks so much. That's really interesting, actually, especially the fact that it started out as a sonnet, really just about Lowell.
Yeah, it wasn't supposed to go on that way.
Another thing that I thought was really interesting, which I think obviously like you isn't really communicated by hearing you read, is the collection has a bunch of notes at the back that kind of give some citations and things for some of the poems in the book. So like, just to give an example for people that haven't seen the hard copy yet. So there's another fairly long poem in the book called Dear Beloved. And the note for Dear Beloved says, in Dear Beloved are lines that are adaptations of or contain references to Albert Milliken's Travels and Adventures of an Orchid Hunter, Hesiod, Tom Waits's Dirt in the Ground, Beowulf, Nina Simone, Bloom by Anna Schuleit Haber, Italo Calvino, and other sources. And so it really struck me, and Marigold also has like a number of cited references in your notes, although there's even more than that, I suspect. And I was just interested in the way that like a lot of your poems in the collection seem to be really intertextual. I guess I know like people that are like academics or like serious critical theory people don't like it when I use intertextual in this kind of more generalized way, but I mean, it's kind of the meaning that it has come to have to lay people. So like, do you know what I mean? Like the way that your writing like is imbricated with all these other texts or songs or other sources. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about, you know, your approach to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, no one should give you any kind of gruff for that version of intertextuality, because that's kind of literally what it is. I mean, I know there are other ways to theorize it, but it's an entirely correct definition. I think that for me, well, there are two two ways in which I can answer that, and they're both kind of related. So the first is Marigolds, for example, is a coming of age story, really. And there is no story of my coming of age that doesn't involve understanding myself and my mind in connection with these various texts. On a very literal level, until I went to college and got the poetry bug partway through, I hadn't conceptualized myself doing really anything. I was a terrible student in high school. I had a lot of trauma issues that were undiagnosed at the time, and was often living in, or had recently lived in, great physical danger. So I didn't see any coming of age until I started coming in touch with these different kinds of texts. So there's no story of the existence of me that doesn't involve an imbricated conversation with all of these different cultural things that have shaped me and given me a kind of sense that there is a reason to live. And then the other connected reason for that is that I really do think the most magical thing about poetry and arts in general is that it's a long, long, long conversation that now increasingly more and more people are finding themselves with the opportunity to enter in the public sphere. And I know that poetry often feels quite lonely, like we're all doing it in private in different spaces, especially now. I mean, we're all even in vastly different little rectangles on a screen. But the thing about poetry itself and what happens on the page in poetry is that the poem is a meeting place for conversation. So for me, especially in long poems where I feel like I am taking up a great deal of room, it's always just important to me to frame that room as also packed with a bunch of other voices. It's a strange thing to say now in COVID times, because I don't think I've been in a packed room since March.
That's really cool to hear about. Thank you. So a couple of questions or talking points, I guess. So one is from our own Michael Schmidt from Carcanet. And I guess this was kind of going back to the marigolds discussion of marigolds. And he says, the long poem is such a challenge. You don't write on narrative, but sound structures and unfolding metaphor and rooting in other texts. How does it know where to start and end? I don't know if there's anything you want to respond to in that thought or not.
Yeah, of course. That's a really hard one. I think that it differs poem to poem. Marigolds, I got a little lucky on that one because it did begin just as what I thought would be a trash sonnet, and then that turned out for a variety of reasons to still be the place where I wanted it to begin. So that was fortunate. The beginning to Dear Beloved, I kind of jostled around with a great deal. I rewrote that and I moved different parts around. And then I guess for an end, it's a tough question to answer, in part because I really like being practical, and this is not a practical answer, but I think I just go until the story is told, and then wherever that happens to be is the end of it. And then revising through that is a period of trying to figure out whether I've told the story adequately. And it is a story usually for me of metaphor and figure, and not a story of narrative. So that can be kind of tough. But still, you can have a sense on whether you're being self-indulgent or going on too long, or whether you're saying something that's really necessary to bring a reader along. And I think that's key for long poems. They're an act of demanding time, and that's the thing that I like about them. I'm saying, to hang with this poem, you need to give me a lot of time, but I also don't like wasting people's time. So just double checking that I'm only including what's really needed, and then just going until the tail of those figures and metaphors spent is, again, a much too loose and frou-frou kind of answer for the practical ones I prefer to like to give, but hopefully it's helpful in some way.
No, that makes a lot of sense, I think. Yeah, I mean, I actually think that's practical, as practical as anything you might have given as advice anyway. Another question actually that's sort of picks up on one of the points Michael made about sort of music. So Julia says, there's a lot of musical imagery in the poems you read. Is there a way in which music can speak to such overpowering anger?
Oh, hi, Julia. I love that question. Thanks. Yes, I think there is. So for me, Autobiographically speaking, I played classical piano for a long time. I moved out of my parents' house as a teenager, and my decision to put down the piano was because my life had dramatically changed, and it is very difficult to run away with a piano. Like, that's just not going to happen. So in a way, that was a point where I kind of made a decision to leave that instrument itself behind. But I think that throughout my childhood, it was possibly one of the, I mean, because it's so tactile, you're hitting things and producing large noises, and you can alter the way that you engage with sound and volume and tone and tempo with your own body. So whatever is stored in your body comes out if you play music. Whatever is governing your body will direct also what you choose to listen to at any point in time. So I think there's something really tactile and really physiological about music, which I think I do also, yes, for sure, carry to the page, especially when thinking about how to employ different sounds, and also when more overtly speaking to different kinds of music. Thanks, that's an awesome question.
And another question that's really interesting is from Gita. And it says, tapestry is a perfect way to describe your work's skill and careful, deliberate intensity, which I agree with. Who are your influences other than those you've spoken of already?
Thank you, Gita. That's a great question too. And it's a really, really big one. I think, so I'm often reading many things at once, and often rereading things that I consider like patron saints of every individual poem, or of a book in particular. So instead of trying to answer what my influences are overall, because that would go on for a long time, I'll tell you that some of the patron saints when writing this book in particular were Lucille Clifton, Alice Oswald, Bridget Pegeen Kelly, Marie Howe, and Ada Limon. Like, those were some of the figures that I thought of as the patron saints of this book in particular. Thanks, I hope that helps. I would give a more detailed answer, but I'll be going on forever if I try listing all the influences.
Great, thank you. And another question, this one is from Tom, and they say, intrigued by the I myself am hell's line from your poem. Is it a reference to Lowell or Paradise Lost or both? And if both, is that why it's pluralized, i.e. hells rather than hell? I wonder if you could discuss that a bit.
Yeah, I love that question. It is a reference to both. Lowell himself quotes that line from Paradise Lost in Skunk Hour, which is one of my favorite Lowell poems. So yeah, I have both of them in mind when writing that. But the plurality doesn't really, to me, it didn't signal both of them. It signaled the plurality of the kind of hellscape scenes that I was conjuring in that poem in particular. So that was intended more self-referentially than outwardly referentially. And although I love the interpretation, and there's a reason why poets don't always make the best readers of their work, even when they're great readers of other people's work. So I love the idea that it's also kind of a subconscious call to both of those reference. Thanks.
I had a question, which was that in a number of the poems, I can't remember if any of the ones you read really reference this so much, but there were sort of references that would reoccur to Louise Bourgeois, the French sculptor, and her work. Like, for people, you might recognize this work even if you don't sort of know it by name. She's famous, among many other things, for these like giant sculptures of spiders that are very scary looking, like I guess made out of metal, and many other works. Anyway, so I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about like sort of what it means to you, or why you felt references to these works fit into your poems or this collection.
Yeah, so there are a lot of reasons why Bourgeois' work has appealed to me for a really long time. In general, with references to other arts, I think that also all fits into the big conversation thing. I'm a huge fan of visual art, and especially sculpture, although Bourgeois is also very well known for paintings and drawings. There's something about sculpture that is really, really appealing to me, particularly when thinking about poetry as well. I know, I don't remember who said it, but someone at some point said something about the sculptor poet versus the painter poet. And like all distinctions, that one's a little bit too neat to actually work. And I wouldn't presume to place myself in either category, but there is something to it, like a chipping away over time or a slowly adding line by line. I mean, I think we all probably do a little of both. But there's something about thinking about that intrigues me when it comes to thinking about sculpture in poems. As for Bourgeois in particular, her carefully crafted sense of rawness, her interest in women and women's bodies in particular, and strange, ugly animals, and not needing anything to be well, they're certainly beautiful, but her priority often seems like it's something else. It's awe, it is terror, it's something strange, something ugly, and I really admire that, and I resonate with it a lot. And also just in terms of the kinds of figures she's drawn to, the figures of women, the giant terrifying spiders, which, yeah, horrifying. Her insomnia drawings, which is a full book full of sketches she did when she couldn't sleep. There are a lot of topical overlaps between my interests and her work as well. So I've always felt a little bit of a secret kinship. Not secret, just secret because she doesn't know. So I'm over here being like, we're friends, and she has no idea who I am or had.
That's really cool. Okay, another question that I had was, so in this collection, again, you kind of mentioned this, but just for the audience, so it's more clear, I guess. So there's like a number of very short poems, or yeah, anyway, very short poems that are all titled "O Spirit." So they all have the exact same title. Obviously, they each have a different text. And then there are these two poems that are both titled Arrow, although again, like they're very different in length and style and everything. So I guess I wonder if you could talk about, sort of how they work in the collection or what your idea is with that. Because again, like I just found it really fascinating and kind of audacious, because I was like, oh, you can write more than one poem with literally the exact same title. And so, like I've never had that impulse, or I don't know what would make me have that impulse. So I was really curious about that.
Yeah, for me, I think when I was choosing titles for this book, and many of these poems were previously published and sometimes under different titles, but when I brought them into the manuscript and started looking at them, I wasn't necessarily looking at what the poem was about per se. I was looking at what it does in the collection as a whole. So for the O Spirit poems, and that used to be the title of the manuscript. I went through 7 different versions of this thing and 7 different titles for it. And the penultimate one was O Spirit. And that's because I feel like those poems really tap into the underbelly of where the speaker's at that particular point in time. There are moments that are sometimes shameful, sometimes deeply personal, moments in which the speaker is not at all the hero. I mean, I believe in not letting the speaker be a hero in general, but the O Spirit poems are ones in which she's particularly mushy in the sense that she's just vulnerable. And that seemed to me to fit the idea of an apostrophe to someone's spirit, right? Like it's not like what you present on the outside. It's not really even about anyone else. It's an address to what is inside, that seemed to well suit the title of O Spirit. And then for the 2 arrows, I like multiplicity, and I'm really drawn to that. And the book is titled Arrow as a whole, so it's all one big arrow, but I liked playing around with the idea that it's not all unified, and there are multiple different kinds of weapons and different kinds of resonances that one word can have, and I wanted to signal at that a bit with the double title poems as well.
Actually tying into that, I was wondering, apart from epigraphs to some of the individual poems, there's an epigraph for the whole collection preceding the poems, which is from Frank Bidart, the American poet. And the epigraph is, "World, with this arrow I be wed." And again, I was wondering if you could discuss a little bit like what it means to you and what it means in relation to the poems in the collection.
Yeah, one of the biggest, not struggles, but biggest journeys of this book, and also correspondingly my life, is coming to terms, it's going to sound cheesy, but it's true, coming to terms with the fact that I do value love and community and people. You know, for me, all of those things, you know, family, love, etc., were weaponized against me since I was a very, very small child. So it was almost like, it's almost more comfortable when you grow up in a circumstance like that to think that you want nothing to do with it at all. Like, you want nothing to do with love. You have no love for the world. And that was a stance that I felt almost paradoxically safer in. So the person that I had to become in order to tell the story I wanted to tell was someone who did not need to have that kind of a blanket, like, to hell with the world posture toward it, and a whole renunciation of love. It was more acknowledging that these concepts matter a lot to me, and the world does matter a lot to me. And when I thought about what the story was that I wanted to tell, especially considering that I wanted to think about the aftermath of violence rather than necessarily depicting violence, I wanted to essentially have kind of like a marriage vow of sorts to the world. I've described it as a contentious love letter to a flawed world, and that's what that epigraph speaks to for me. And also, the Easter egg fun fact is that Frank Bedart was my first ever poetry teacher. I do not know why he paid attention to me. I was very bad at the time, like really bad, I promise. But he managed to look past or through or underneath that, and I'm forever grateful.
That idea of kind of that you're marrying yourself to the world is really beautiful, I think, and really fascinating. Another question we have is from Julia, and she says, to mention a very different kind of writer, Wendy Cope, I don't know if you're familiar with her work, she's a British poet. Wendy Cope has a poem in which she says that, like Wordsworth, she has a lot of emotions, but unlike him, is very short of tranquility in which to recollect them. So, you know, this famous quote from Wordsworth.
Yeah.
So do you feel that any of your poems are able to find a place of tranquility from which to write?
That's really interesting. So the Wordsworth quote is that poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful emotion, later recollected in tranquility, if I remember that right. I think that, yeah, probably somewhat paradoxically, the poems of mine that seem the most angry are the ones that do come from a later recollected in tranquility. And it's not a tranquility that has necessarily come to terms with anything or feels particularly great, but it's more like a quietness of kind of a satellite's distance, so that I can dip down and dip up as need may be. I'm not much one for thinking of writing as therapy. You know, writing and therapy are both valuable, and they're also two very, very different things. So especially when you write about traumatic experiences, as I often do, there's a tendency, or there's the possibility of either being too close to it in a way that involves hurting yourself, or being too close to your own narratives of how you think about and how you yourself have processed trauma, and then turning that into the entire poem. And that's not a poem, that's like a conversation with a therapist, which I'm grateful to also have. But you have to, in my view, be able to pull out far enough away from your own narratives and your own ingrained understandings of those powerful, spontaneous overflows of feelings, to be able to translate that into a room that anyone else can meet you in, which is, again, I'm full of packed rooms today in this conversation, but is again how I think about a poem. So yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would call it tranquility exactly, but there's certainly something about that recollected that rings true for some of my, especially my most vulnerable, furious poems.
Okay. I'm super impressed that you're able to pull the Wordsworth quote out of your memory, but I
am a professional nerd.
Okay, just one last quick question, I think, and then we need to wrap up. But so I guess, you know, what are you sort of working on now? Or are you sort of in a hiatus between, you know, since you've just finished a whole book and project and stuff, or are you all working on new things?
Yeah, so I am working on new things, but I don't want it to sound glorious, like I'm immediately on to something else. This book was wrapped about 2 years ago, so we've had edits and stuff since then, but still I've had some time. I definitely took a little time to reset. Yeah, I'm working on new work. I have one series ongoing. There are a few of these published online called The B-Sides of the Golden Records. I don't know if you all know about the 1977 American spaceship, the Challenger. On it, Jimmy Carter was the president of the US at the time, and a group of scientists like Carl Sagan and an interdisciplinary group of folks put on 2 golden records, that's what they called them, onto these spaceships. And they were essentially full of the greatest hits of humanity, right? They had pictures of beautiful stuff, they have sound clips of things from everyday human experience. And I wanted to think about what they leave out. So my series is about imagining the B-sides, what for a variety of reasons didn't make it or wouldn't make it onto the greatest hits of humanity. That's what my poems are trying to do, or try to dwell in. And also a series of visual poems. So I had a hysterectomy in 2018. And when I had that surgery, I asked the surgeon to send me photographs of the operation. Apparently, I was very intent on it. He told me that as I was going under, I told him, you absolutely cannot screw up these photographs because you'll ruin my second book. I have no memory. I have absolutely no memory of terrorizing this poor man who was about to perform a complicated procedure in this way, but apparently I did. He sent the photographs. In the end, they're endoscopic, so through a little camera and scope that did the procedure, and they're in a picture-in-picture format. So I played with those shapes. You know, I'm obsessed with planets and circles and bodies. So I played with those shapes and created a series of visual poems that are kind of thinking about histories of hysterectomies, in some ways doing ekphrases of those pictures themselves. So those are the poems I'm working on. I'm not yet sure what exactly they'll look like in terms of the second book, but I'm kind of moseying toward that direction.
Wow, those sounds totally cool, I have to say, especially the B-sides thing. Well, and also obviously the photos and the surgery is just crazy. So I'm really excited to read this. I'm gonna try to find some if they're online. You said you published them already, maybe.
Yeah, before we log off, can I ask the other poet mentioned, I think by Julia, was that Wendy Pope?
Oh, Wendy Cope.
Wendy Cope, okay, I'm gonna look her up, thanks.
Okay, well, I guess we are basically out of time now. So maybe Jasmine wants to wrap up.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. Thank you both so much. Sumita, I feel like you gave us so much in such a really short period of time, and it's been such a real pleasure to hear you read and to hear this conversation. So thank you, Jane, for hosting the reading. Thank you so much for putting those questions to Sumita. It's been a real pleasure. For you guys that are attending, thank you for being here again. I'm putting the link in the chat for you now, and the code is there to get your discount off the book. That'll come as an email tomorrow as well, so don't worry about it, because we'll close that in a minute. So get in touch with me if you don't get the code. But yeah, go and buy the book and read the book. Everybody should really read this entire book. But thank you for being here to launch it with us tonight. So the last thing I just want to say is please do join us next week. We're launching James Womack's new collection, Homunculus, with favourite poet Richard Scott. He'll be there talking to James about it. So that's the same time next week, and all the details are on our website. So please do come along. And finally, again, just congratulations, Sumita, and thank you so much for this amazing book, and thank you, Jane, for hosting this reading.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Jazz, for everything. Thanks, Jane.
Okay, that's everything from us. I'm going to close this reading down now. But thank you all for being here, and hopefully we'll see you again.